Ladies and gentlemen, sports fans alike, welcome to another edition of Bill Swirsky, Sports Talk Chicago, one of the couple, two, three best podcasts around. So sit back, grab yourself a cold one and a Polish sausage, park your keister in the French room, and listen to Bill Swirsky, Sports Talk Chicago.
In Chicago, you know that all sports rock. The Bears, Hawks, Bulls, Cubs, and Sox. Pick your favorite, you can choose, as long as the Packers lose. For everything you need to know, it's Bill Swirsky, Sports Talk Chicago. Bill Swirsky, Sports Talk Chicago.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Bill Swirsky Sports Talk Chicago. This is your hosts, Alex and Sean. On this episode, we will talk huge Cubs victory, devastating Bears defeat, and if we have time, maybe we'll sprinkle in a little Bulls, how bad they are, is how we thought they'd be, and the Blackhawks, maybe some people threw dirt on their graves a little too soon. All this and more on this episode of Bill Swirsky Sports Talk Chicago. But first, I'd like to thank our sponsor, the Rockford Ice Hogs. If you're not familiar with the Rockford Ice Hogs, they're the AHL minor league affiliate of the Chicago Blackhawks. What does that mean for you? You get to see the stars of tomorrow today at family-friendly, affordable prices. The season starts this week, so don't sleep on getting tickets because they will sell out. So head on over to icehogs.com, pick up tickets, hat, shirt, jersey, and more, and tell them Swirsky Sports sent you. All right, Alex. I'm not sure if this is a late night one already, so I don't know if we'll get to Bulls and Blackhawks. And the Bulls really don't deserve anything, but the Blackhawks, I want to give them the respect they deserve. So do you want to start with this Bears team or the Cubs team?
I figure before we got on that, did we want to touch a little bit on the Hawks?
Sure. Absolutely. I didn't see today's game, so I'm going to fair warning because there was a little bit of other exciting stuff going on.
Yeah, no kidding.
But the first two games I watched, from puck drop to final horn, and when the season started, before it started at the training camp festival, I was talking with my friend, and we were looking at the schedule, and we were kind of looking what the dates were that they were playing in Las Vegas, considering flying out to Vegas and going to a game. And I'm like, that'd be a good idea. And then I started looking. I was like, holy cow! Like their first 8 games are against like the best teams in hockey, and what a way to start with a newly built defense, defensive pairings, and a lot of young players. I'm like, this is going to be a tough beginning of the season, and clearly they are up for the challenge.
Yeah, I mean, we saw kind of a lot of what we've wanted to see since they won their last Stanley Cup. We saw quickness, we saw a lot of good passing, we saw some good fundamentals, we saw a bit of physicality, that especially that first game, that incredible 10-1 game, we saw like what looked like a completely refreshed Blackhawks team, and I'm going to say that I think having Brandon Saad back makes a big, big difference in a positive way.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I absolutely loved having Artemi Panarin here. He's such a talented guy, but honestly Brandon Saad fits so much better in with what the Blackhawks are trying to do, and no matter how good that second line is, that Kane line is, it's the Taves line. If that's the one that's clicking, that's when the Blackhawks do the best.
Yeah, especially since now that kind of adds a bit more depth, I'd say, among the lines, because now that you have Saad with Taves again, not only does it make that top line better, but then that allows you to see Nick Schmaltz play with Kane, and I think that's going to translate really, really well going forward. So it's more than just, I think, one top line. It's huge for the Taves line, but it really kind of lets you do a few more things with the other lines too.
Yeah, and I think a big one is moving Artem Anisimov further down and being a third line center, and you're seeing the Blackhawks be able to score from so many different lines that it makes them a potent team again.
Yeah, and you know what I also like about it is that Marian Hossa is out for the year with that awful skin condition, and oftentimes Saad's play is compared to like Marian Hossa. Obviously, not at the same level of Marian Hossa because he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, but Saad is really, really good, and he gives a lot of that same fundamental play on both sides of the puck. So that's important too. I mean, I think that Saad brings a lot more versatility to the team than Artemi Panarin did, and like you said, it was fun watching Panarin in a Blackhawks uniform. He was a great scorer. But when you look at all these little things Brandon Saad can do, that's really important to have on a team, especially if you're looking to make another cup run.
And I think that was when that trade was made. I think that's what all the positive outlook was, is, what well-rounded player that Brandon Saad is. And he's a penalty killer. You can use him on the penalty kill. Two-way player. He's on the Taves line. He's going to make that Taves line better. All the things that we had hoped would happen through a couple of games are starting to come to fruition.
Yep. So I know you said that you didn't see today's game, correct?
Yeah, I did. I was, checking in on the score, but I basically watched the Cubs game, ate dinner with my family, and then came down.
Yeah, because I saw the end of it, and I mean, it looks like the Hawks' energy was just kind of sucked out of them, and they committed a lot of dumb penalties, which we're going to get to when we talk to another certain Chicago team later. But yeah, I mean, it was penalty after penalty after penalty, and they got outshot heavily in the second half of that game. I mean, they were in pretty good control the first half, but the second half, from the mid-second period on, the Leafs dominated. And you know what? Be thankful they got a point out of that. The way they played at the end, especially in overtime, be blessed we got a point out of that. I'll just say that.
Yeah, and it's not anything to be knocked at because Tampa Bay. Toronto has had a good team last year, and through the first couple of games, they scored 15 goals as well, the same as the Blackhawks. So this is another high-powered scoring team. So, you knew you were in for a shootout on this one, and you just had to come ready to play. And, it seems like the Blackhawks, from what I'm just seeing from Twitter timeline, is struggled mightily at the end, and from what you're saying. So this is bound to happen with new defensive pairings and
and that's another thing that a lot of people may forget is that there's a good number of players on this team that are still 25 and under, Saad included. And obviously you have some guys who are new, like Jan Ruda. He's not young, but he's new. His scoring is looking great. And though things look pretty in sync, like you said, there will be a few growing pains here or there as the season begins. And, I mean, the schedule that the Blackhawks have, it's brutal. I mean, they've played what? They're going to play 8 straight playoff teams, I think Pat Foley said from last year. They started off against the champs. They went and played Columbus, the Leafs, now the Habs tomorrow. And then you have a few other playoff teams coming alongside. So it's a tough beginning of the year.
Yeah, it's tough. And the way this schedule is set up as well is, not as many days off. It is tough, and it's going to be a testing, testing their mettle there. But you know what? If the Blackhawks come out of this looking decent, like they have in the start, that's going to bode well for the rest of the season.
Right. Exactly. I think the last thing I'd want to say about the Hawks is I liked what I saw overall from Forsberg, the backup goalie today, the stuff I did see. So I just want to reiterate again that Saad trade really was a good move because we got him as well because there was nobody else.
Yeah, I mean, there was some smart offseason moves, and you know, the first two games at least, as well as the Blackhawks played, and the two teams that are incredible teams that they dominated, there was a lot of room for improvement for the Blackhawks. That was the part I took away. Is it's one thing if you dominate a team like the defending Stanley Cup champion Pittsburgh Pirates, geez.
Yeah.
You could tell it's late. The Pittsburgh Penguins. If you would dominate a team like that and you play one of those like absolutely flawless games, then you sort of take it with a little bit of grain of salt, because anybody that plays a perfect game can beat any other team in professional sports. But the Blackhawks still had a lot of flaws in their game, especially on the power play. Is that they looked pretty dreadful. They could have done a lot better in those games. That's the nice takeaway, is that there's room for growth on this team.
Exactly, and that's why it's still exciting to watch them moving forward. It's not like some people were declaring how everything for the Hawks is over. No, there's still a lot of exciting things to look forward to in the future.
Yeah, this team, I think a lot of people, myself included, thought that we saw the window closing for this championship opportunity, but the way that they rebuilt this team on the fly, that I think that window is extended a little longer than most of us expected.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we saw last year how old and slow they looked, and it was kind of easy to say, well, maybe it is over, but, I don't think it is.
I mean, the big noticeable difference is just how much faster they're skating. And that's
definitely.
And that is the way the NHL is going, is having these slow lumbering players is not the way of the future. And the Blackhawks last year is, I mean, granted that they weren't Michael Roosevelt's out there, but they were so slow to set plays up. They were so slow to skate to pucks that teams like Nashville could easily set up those defenses and really cause problems for the Blackhawks. And what you're seeing now is the Blackhawks' speed is preventing these other teams from doing the things that they want to do in their own defensive zones, and they're having to react rather than set up and dictate.
Right, and we saw kind of last year, like you said, how slow they looked in the playoffs and the speed of Nashville, and the way the game is going, it just seems like it's getting faster and faster and faster by the year. You're going away from this big physical tough guy type play to just speed and finesse. And now that you're getting some young blood into this with guys who are already talented, it's good to know there's still some depth out there, because if the Blackhawks didn't have some of this younger depth, then they could be in real trouble here. And, that's why I think the way they look faster now is very promising. But I think we are going to be asking ourselves are they going to be able to maintain this throughout the entire year? Just because, though there are a lot of young guys, a lot of the key guys, whether it's on defense or offense, have a lot of miles on them.
Yeah, and another thing I just wanted to point out is there was one player that made the Blackhawks roster that a lot of the big name bloggers didn't think his skills would translate into the NHL at this point in his life. They thought it would take a few years of playing more junior hockey to get to that point, but that's DeBrincat. And I think everyone was curious to see what would happen in training camp, and we saw he was able to skate with people and looked okay, and you're like, okay, the game's not too big for him, but how is it going to translate if he plays against competition where it's live hitting and it's a live game? And I think he's held his own. I think he's definitely not afraid to get in there and mix it up and play with the physicality of the NHL, and he's looked pretty decent.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that, and that's something else I think a lot of people are going to be keeping an eye on. I think also with this whole season, as a whole, I feel like there's somewhat of an added pressure to go deeper in the playoffs this year. Maybe not win a cup, but at least get out of the first round. Because I think I was able to live with the last 2 years, even though last year was really awful. But I think if that happens a third year, that's going to be a little aggravating.
I would agree. And and on one hand, you're like, this team has underperformed the last couple seasons. But on the flip side is this is almost a completely new roster for the most part. I know you brought some familiar faces back with Sharp and Saad, but really is this was almost a rebuild from last year. Changed up. You've gotten rid of so many defensemen, brought in new defensemen. There's no line that's the same from last year. Not a single line is the same.
No, not at all.
So yeah, I mean, there's going to be bumps in the road. And so you have to get those ironed out because you don't have the continuity of a veteran, synced team that's been together for a bunch of years. But I could go, I guess I would be disappointed if they don't get out of the first round this year. But I can sort of see some of the flaws in there is with the youth and inexperience and the lack of experience together.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, that's a long way from now, I guess. So, we're only 3 games in, which is amazing. And, hopefully, like I said, hopefully this trend of better speed keeps up because I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think that's the huge linchpin of this all. And honestly, I think a huge part of this is that they didn't give Coach Q those safety nets that he likes of those old veteran defensemen that he'd feel like he can't live without, and you force him into younger, faster defensemen who are less experienced, and he's got to live with them and he's got to make them work. And I think forcing Q out of the comfort zone is ultimately going to be better for the Blackhawks.
Yeah, I think so too, because I think he's smart enough to realize, though it is out of his kind of comfort zone, as you said, you got to make adjustments, especially with the way the competition around him is adjusting with this faster, skilled play. The Blackhawks have a lot of quick, skilled players, but he's got to adjust accordingly in how to coach it. There's a lot more to coaching a hockey team than I think some people realize, and I think he does realize that going out of your comfort zone is something that just you need to do to adjust.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of it was is Bowman sort of sticking it to Q, saying, we're not happy with how things have gone. We're going to do it this way, and if you can't coach with the players that we think are the best, then it's time for you to go. So shape up or ship out. And because there's been some of those undertones with some coaching firings and some rumblings that have been said, and so you wonder if getting rid of some of these safety nets of Coach Q that was shots fired that you need to get better and faster on with your blue liners.
Yeah, and it's interesting how you said that all, because I think a lot of people didn't realize how Stan Bowman really kind of took the reins here and wasn't in the mood or in the mindset to kind of clash with anything. He put his foot down and he took action and took it into his own hands, whether it was with his coaching staff, whether it was with the players and the roster. He put his foot down and did it himself. And would I say sticking to? I think you could kind of phrase it that way. The way I kind of see it is just taking immediate action and how do I say it? It's in a way a sticking to, but it's not in a spiteful way. It's in a hey, wake the hell up, we need to make a change now type of way. If that makes sense.
The way the Blackhawks front office is working the Bulls should take a memo, take a note of how this is done, because the Bulls are dysfunctional and they don't know how to do this accordingly. And John Paxson, as the head basketball man of that organization, should take the cue and say, listen, I'm going to put this team together, not to put the team together that my coaches want or what this person wants or that person wants. I'm going to put the best team I can on the court. And that's really what Stan Bowman's doing. He's saying, this is the team that I can get in the salary cap. That's the absolute best that I can. And my coaches have to coach with this because that's how we're going to win.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's exactly what I'd want the Bulls to do, but that's a story for another day. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And, hopefully it was just all for the better, and I think it definitely was. And I'm feeling better, like, already in this season than I did last season because, last season we never saw that much greatness from this Hawks team. There was a lot of fortune during the regular season. There were a lot of lucky wins. There was a lot of, a lot of games the Hawks got outplayed, but they still managed ways to win. This team actually looks like they can flat out beat teams, and in the first two games they did, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but they already look more promising than they did last year. Let's just say that.
And already better at the face-off dot.
Yeah.
That was a big problem last year, and at least the first two games looked so much better on the face-offs. So that's always a positive too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Only a couple games in, so not too much to talk about. I think we can get into that more next episode when we've got a couple more games under our belts and we can really evaluate them. And I recorded today's game, so tomorrow I will watch that one. So would you like to move on to the Bears or the Cubs?
I don't know. What are you feeling?
I say let's keep on a positive trend, go Cubs, and then end this one on a Debbie Downer. So yeah, since we last talked, the Cubs have played 3 games in this best of 5 series against the Washington Nationals, and I think the first thing to note is the pitching matchups probably aren't they definitely weren't what we were expecting them to be.
It was very interesting the way this series played out because you had 2 guys who were one obvious number 1 and one a potential number 1 with hamstring issues. That changed a lot of things in this series.
Yeah, hamstring issues on both teams that affected things. So I think what we were expecting was is probably Arrieta game 1, Lester game 2, Hendricks game 3, Quintana game 4, and hamstring issues causing a major shakeup on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially with the Nationals because their number 1 guy, no doubt, was Max Scherzer, and he went today. Obviously, we'll talk about the game in a minute, but he would have probably been game 1 and then Strasburg game 2. And with Arrieta, the way he was pitching, it was very possible he could go a game 1. So, that really switched things up.
Yeah, and then when the Cubs made the announcement that it was funny, a coworker of mine is a big Cubs fan, and I sent her an instant message jokingly saying, "Oh, did you hear Hendricks is going game 1?" And she replied, "Yeah, I just saw the announcement." And I was like, "What?" I didn't know they had made the announcement. And literally it was like a minute after they made the announcement. And it was Hendricks game 1.
Yeah, and you know what? He darn well proved why he's a good pitcher and why he deserved that number 1 spot in the situation he was in. That was another fantastic outing from Kyle Hendricks, and I think you got to trust him every time he goes out now. He has nothing more to prove.
Yeah, I don't have... He and Wade Davis are the 2 pitchers that I just don't get this nervous anxiety when they're on the mound. I just feel confident and comfortable. Pretty much everybody else, I still get, varying degrees of the nervousness when they're pitching.
Well, yeah, if this was a normal John Lester, he'd be in that same category. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, but this season,
right?
And excuse me, we'll get to game 2, but he had some moments where he nearly had a heart attack while he was pitching, but but Kyle Hendricks, I don't have any fear or anxiety. Even the Cubs may lose, their offense may lag during the game, but I just feel confident that he's going to pitch us and keep us in the game.
Yeah, exactly. No, I definitely agree with that. And when you mentioned that whole thing about John Lester this year versus other years, I think one of the biggest concerns that a lot of people had on top of that with him was, A, was he going to pitch well? And B, was he going to be able to last long? Because, there's been a lot of questions about a lot of guys in the bullpen, which brings up a whole other thing, is that if he couldn't go long, then you'd have to use a lot of the bullpen, and I don't know if you could trust that.
Yeah, you saw, I don't know how much you've been watching some of the American League playoffs, but the only game the Red Sox won is they had another short outing from a starting pitcher. I think he only went an inning and a third. And David Price had to come in and pitch 4 innings of relief.
Right. And, we've seen scenarios where that kind of thing works and that kind of thing doesn't work. And whether it works or it doesn't, when you use up a lot of guys like that in one game, especially if you kind of question how you trust them, sometimes you get a little nervous and sometimes it could, screw kind of the flow up a bit. But luckily, even though it was a loss, John Lester was able to do some pretty good work.
Yeah, and I think that is the sole benefit of having a John Lackey on this playoff roster, is if you have somebody just absolutely implode or somebody get injured early in a start, is you can put him in and not burn through your bullpen. Is he could come in and pitch 5 innings. Theoretically.
Right. Exactly.
And that is the sole benefit of having him on this playoff roster. That, and so he doesn't go and set Joe's house on fire.
Well, yeah.
But game 1 was fantastic. It was, but it was hilarious, because after the game, I was talking to my wife and I was like, it was so frustrating because they just talked all night long about how Steven Strasburg was dealing, and he had the Cubs hitter so confused, and he was just, lights out. And I was like, are you watching the other half of the inning? Like Kyle Hendricks has these, this murderer's row of Washington Nationals hitters just absolutely befuddled.
Yeah, and it was really interesting because there was not a lot of, how do I say it? There was not a lot of strikeouts to begin the game. It was a lot of like in play, and I mean there were some, but it seemed like he got stronger and stronger as it went on, and you saw more guys striking out, and it was kind of the opposite for the Cubs, where they were striking out left and right to begin, and then they started barreling up the ball a little bit. So, that was kind of interesting to keep note of.
Yeah, and Bruce Levine was talking after the game, and he was saying that the Cubs really lucked out with putting such a bad defense in the outfield for Game 1, and they got away with it by having Schwarber in left, Zobrist in right, and Hayward in center. And that is probably their worst configuration of defensive outfielders that they have. Hayward out of position, and then your two worst fielding outfielders in the corners. But honestly, I don't think that was luck that they got away with that. I think it was knowing who was on the mound. I didn't think they expected a lot of fly balls with Hendricks on the mound. There was going to be a lot of soft grounders and a lot of pop-ups.
Right, and you saw that early on where he got some ground balls. He got a big double play. I think it was the 4th inning. He walked the leadoff guy, and then he got a double play ball. That was really, really cool. And then later as the game went on, going into the bullpen, you saw more of the strikeouts and that kind of thing. And it didn't seem like that Game 1, there was a lot required of the outfield in terms of defense. It wasn't hit to them very much. At least that's how I remember it. There was no big play that they had to do. I mean, the Nationals only had 2 hits. Both hits were singles. And I really can't remember a time when an outfielder had to make a really big play out there, because one play I distinctly remember defensively was in the 1st inning, and that was a line drive to Rizzo. And that was probably one of the hardest hit balls, if not the hardest hit balls the Nationals had all game.
Yeah, and I think that was absolutely something that Joe anticipated. Was he wasn't worried about the trade-off of fielding for bats, because he didn't expect his outfielders to have to do a whole lot, and he was right, and they didn't. We'll get to that same gamble later in the series, but yeah, I mean, you didn't generate as much offense from that configuration as you expected, but especially with how bad Zobrist looked in that first game.
Yeah, unfortunately, Zobrist hasn't looked good until the later innings of this most recent game. But yeah, you're definitely right. And I thought it was really interesting when the lineup came out for Game 1. When was the last time you remember Jason Hayward being scheduled in center field? Usually when you see Zobrist in the outfield, whether it's left or right, it usually means one of your typical guys gets a day off, and either he plays in right field or Zobrist plays in right field and gets it off. Because Hayward is still a good outfielder in center field, but he's nowhere near as good as he is in right field. So I thought that was interesting, and I know he can play center field, but it's just you didn't see that as much as he's been a Cub. You saw it more when he was a Cardinal, but as a Cub, I think it really caught a lot of people by surprise seeing him put in center field. And I guess, they wanted to get Zobrist's bat in there for the experience and the matchup, lefty-righty. In his case, a switch hitter, but he was batting lefty. So I thought that was really interesting. And obviously, they wanted to get Schwarber in there, so they put him in left field, and that's what you do if you get him in there. So it was an interesting lineup.
Yeah, I mean, it was a way to have all lefty outfield, batting-wise. And Zobrist, Joe counts on Ben Zobrist to excel come playoffs, and he's going to play him over people that he would, probably give at-bats and innings to during the regular season, that he's going to give those to Ben Zobrist come playoffs because he trusts him that much, namely Javi Baez. So it was interesting to see that start, and And I think a lot of fans were not happy with the at-bats that Zobrist gave. And it wasn't that it wasn't the results per se, because I can live with over 4 if you have 4 good at-bats. But he had some real bad
hacking at the
at-bats.
first pitch weekly, that's not like him.
Yeah, like not taking a lot of pitches, swinging at some bad pitches. He just didn't look comfortable up there. You almost would guess that that wrist was bothering him or his back is bothering him.
Yeah, people are kind of trying to figure out what's up with Zobrist, and I think a lot of people can come to the conclusion that it's age or the wrist back issues, and I just think it's kind of a combination of everything, really. But it's still kind of surprising that he didn't give good at-bats in those first few games, because he still can do that. He's just not getting the results, like you said. You saw in the regular season, even though he was grounding out a lot and striking out a bit more, he at least took close pitches, he still walked a decent amount, and he still gave you a good at-bat. But, I mean, he just went up there and, just weakly tapped out on the first pitch twice. I mean, in 2 at-bats, his first 2 at-bats, he swung at 2 pitches, and he saw only 2 pitches. So it was very unusual. And I said in a pregame show with Sports Sanity that Zobrist is not a guy I'd expect to do that. It's something I'd expect to give him a good at-bat, even if he doesn't get on. And that's kind of why I justified him being in there like Joe Madden decided, but you kind of saw the opposite.
Yeah, and you got away with it in that first game because of how well Kyle Hendricks pitched, and you got away with it because you scored a couple of runs. But it was looking ugly for the Cubs offense for a while, because they looked so bad against Steven Strasburg. And I know that Strasburg, when he's healthy, he's a darn good pitcher. But they were just really struggling against him. And when they
were down in the count every time, every at bat, the first 4 innings.
And they weren't. And I think part of it is, we're so used to the Cubs working the count and chasing the starting pitcher early, getting to the bullpen. But I think the approach this year, and it, for the most part, has been pretty effective as anything else, is pitchers have been really aggressive with the Cubs and pitching things in the strike zone and not letting the Cubs take these walks like they did last year. They're just being so aggressive with the strike zone. And that's why you see Cubs struggle with these pitchers that, just work the strike zone and are go after the hitters like Strasburg, like Scherzer.
And it makes it tougher because they keep getting ahead of you. So it's like, well, if they're getting ahead, they're obviously throwing strikes. So if they're throwing strikes, you got to attack that. It's kind of hard to take a first pitch if you think and almost know it's going to be a strike, because you don't want to keep falling behind again. And that allowed Strasburg to kind of control the tempo of the Cubs batters. They say, well, if they're going to be aggressive, then I'm going to change things up while I'm aggressive. I'm going to attack the strike zone in different ways. And that continued to have the Cubs flustered. And, even if they were aggressive and swinging right away, sometimes they'd hit it weakly or sometimes they'd swing and miss. But either way, Strasburg was ahead of them.
Yeah, it wasn't until later in the game, towards right around 100 pitches, that the Cubs finally got to him and knocked in a couple of runs. And then the Cubs bullpen came in and shut that game down. But it was a huge victory to come away with taking that first game, because in a 5-game series is you don't have the luxury of giving up a game, a pitcher's duel game, like you can in a 7-game series.
And we said this before on the last show. It was more of an advantage for the Nationals in a 5-game series than a 7-game series, even with even with Scherzer going third and Strasburg going first, because their top 3 guys in Gonzalez, Strasburg, and Scherzer are 3 of the best in the NL right there. So that first win was huge. And also, what was interesting about that first game was this was kind of my thought process. The Nationals had chances early to score. Kyle Hendricks shut them down. Then Kyle Hendricks got further and further along, and he picked up steam and got better and better and better as he went along. And that's something that Theo Epstein and Madden and co. have praised. So as he went along and Strasburg kept doing his thing, I said, we've seen this all year where the Cubs look flustered through the first few innings, then they adjust. And when you're stranding those opportunities like the Nationals had early on, that's going to come back to bite you more times than not. So I almost had that good feeling as the game was going on, even though they were getting no hit. I said, I think they're going to break through sometime or rather here. And then, of course, they did.
Yeah, and then fast forward to game 2 is you had another great pitching performance with Gonzalez versus Lester. And Lester, he had his struggles in game 2, and he had to work himself out of some really tough jams. But overall, he pitched more than well enough to win that game.
Yeah, I mean, he grinded his way. What was it, 6 innings he pitched, I want to say?
Yeah.
Right, because Strop came in the 7th.
And, I mean, ultimately, the fatal flaw was Joe Madden's never-ending trust in C.J. Edwards. And listen, and I know a lot of people are just completely bashing Joe, and I'm going to join that bandwagon in a second, but I want to preface it because you can tell when Carl Edwards has it and when he doesn't. When he comes out there and he's generating swings on pitches in the dirt, when he's finding the strike zone, I'm completely comfortable with him going to battle against Bryce Harper. But when Carl Edwards can't find the plate and he's throwing a lot of balls, then that is his MO for disaster. It's usually not guys hitting him. It's him giving up a lot of walks, not finding the strike zone. And when that is the case, which was game 2, you've got all these lefties. You haven't used at that point. You hadn't used a lefty from the bullpen. Is give a lefty a chance against Bryce Harper.
Well, because who led off the inning? Daniel Murphy, and he got an 0-2 base hit, right?
No, I think he walked. Did he get a base hit or did he walk? He got on base.
I thought he got a base hit.
Okay. I couldn't quite remember. I just remember he got on base. But, Edwards was really struggling to find the plate. And if you look at Bryce Harper's numbers, he hits everybody, and he's a fantastic baseball player. But this year, 26 of his 29 home runs are against righties. And he's hitting .322 against righties. And for his career, he's 34 points higher batting average against righties. And he has almost 5 times as many home runs against righties versus lefties. So I get how good Carl Edwards can be. But when he's struggling to find the plate, that's not the time. That's the time you go, we don't want to walk him and get 2 guys on. We want to get the lefty matchup here.
This is how I kind of saw it, and it was kind of an interesting situation. So Carl Edwards Jr. comes on, gives up an 0-2 hit to Murphy. Then he gets, who was batting after him? Was it Rendon? It was a right-handed hitter. And then he faced Bryce Harper. Now, Harper has killed right-handed pitchers. And I know Edwards Jr. has done really well against left-handed batters. So it was a really tough situation, I think. And I'm kind of the opinion, and this just comes for the Bryce Harper home run, I'm kind of the opinion where I don't blame Madden fully for this. I think it was just failed execution. I mean, the curveball was an absolute hanger, and then he mashed it to Kingdom Come. Maybe Maybe you go to a lefty in that situation. Maybe you go to a Dunsing or a Montgomery. I'm trying to remember how long Edwards was in that game after the Harper home run, because I know they got 2 more hits and then the home run by Zimmerman, which pissed me off because, let's face it, that was kind of wind assisted, if you remember.
Yeah, I honestly, I turned it off after the after the home run, because I was done. I was so angry, and I just knew that was going to be the downfall of the Cubs, and I turned it off. But it was a bad way to end a game, because they could have just easily ended that inning, and you would have had Wade Davis coming up there and wrap that game up, and you would have left Washington up 2 games in a best-of-5 series going back to Chicago.
Now here's another question. Speaking of Wade Davis, some people were even saying going Wade Davis for a 5-out save. Now, I felt like if Joe Madden would have done that, he would have still gotten a lot of flack for that. But I think that it also could have maybe been done. Because here's the thing. Wade Davis does have experience going multiple innings for a playoff save. We've seen him do it with the Royals for several years. So, I don't know. What do you think about that? Would you have considered a 5-out save from Wade Davis? Keep in mind, I'm not saying after the Harper home run. I'm saying after 2 more guys got on after the Harper home run and Zimmerman came to the plate. Would you have gone to Wade Davis in that situation?
No. If the only way this early in the playoffs I would have gone with a 5-out save for Wade Davis is if you had used your trusted guys in the bullpen already, and the last guy you had before him was struggling, and you had a couple of guys on base and 2 outs, then I would be like, before the damage was done. Once damage is done, no, I wouldn't fire those bullets yet, because if you're going to win this series, you're going to have to ride Wade Davis to finish those games out.
Right.
And if you're going to use him up that early, I think that's a waste.
Yeah, no, I agree, because by that point it would have been a 3-3 game, and I think that if you were talking about bringing him in before Harper came to the plate, I think that'd be kind of a panic move, because you still have other guys in the bullpen to go ahead and do it after that. So I think whether scenario I suggested, either after the Harper home run, after the guys got on, or before the Harper home run, it would have been really, really tough to do. Now, let's say there were 2 outs and Harper up for a 4-out save. If that were the situation, I'd be a bit more tempted to do that, but that was not the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I still wouldn't have done it this early in the playoffs if this was the closeout game, or this was game 5 of the first round, and you gotta make sure that you don't leave anything in the tank. Then yeah, but this was game 2 when you're already up 1-0 and took away home field advantage from Washington. I don't think that's the point to do it. But they gave that game to the Nationals, and my big concern was, it wasn't so much that they lost, because I think if I remember correctly, we both anticipated that the Cubs would leave Washington and come back to Chicago 1-1. And that's exactly what it was. But it was just the way that it happened.
Right.
It felt like you were just worried that the Cubs, and I know this team is shown time and time again that they have a much stronger can't die attitude, but as Chicago fans, I think our concern was that this team would feel a little demoralized by that game, and it would give a boost to the Nationals. coming back to Chicago when they took a game at the end, and especially with I believe Scherzer was supposed to pitch game 4 of this series, if I'm not mistaken, and they moved him up to 30.
Yeah, because I remember, I think it wasn't his start kind of up in the air to start the series, but because they weren't completely sure about his hamstring status, and Dusty went 3.
Yeah, and I believe most people were talking that it would be a matchup of Scherzer and Arrieta, but in a different game than everyone expected to. But you had Scherzer come out, and he was dealing.
You're talking about Scherzer in today's game.
Today's game, yeah. So we come back, and they've gotten this boost from taking game 2 from the Cubs, and they've got Scherzer on the mound just dealing. And as much as I've liked Jose Quintana as a Cub, we don't have as much of a history with him that we can have this trust level with him. So every inning he went out there, he did fantastic today.
He was great.
But you were just like, oh God, I don't know what to expect here.
Well, yeah, okay. So it's interesting how you bring up Scherzer's start. To me, Scherzer did not look nearly 100%, and he was not throwing the ball nearly as well as he usually does. And I think the Cubs they failed to capitalize on a lot of very hittable pitches. I thought his breaking stuff looked pretty flat. His fastball wasn't always well located. What was really good, I will give him credit, was his changeup. He was getting guys out on that changeup, but even though he sparkled through a lot of, on the score sheet, I didn't think Scherzer looked nearly as good as he normally does, and he didn't look nearly as comfortable as he normally did.
And honestly, I think this was a little bit of a desperation move on behalf of Dusty Baker to pitch him game 3. Now I'm starting to wonder if that he expected to throw Scherzer out there to get this win and put all the pressure on the Cubs to have to win a game at Wrigley Field. And really what happened is you got the loss with Scherzer, and now you've got to face Jake Arrieta and beat Jake Arrieta to stay alive in this series.
Right, and hopefully we'll see what Jake Arrieta brings, because he obviously had hamstring issues too, and we know that even though his command has been superb in the second half, something like that could maybe throw things off a little bit. But Jake Arrieta's been in big postseason situations before, and I think, knock on wood, that the matchup tomorrow or today, you're probably going to be listening today, we are recording this very late, that the matchup is a bit more favorable for the Cubs if they do indeed start Tanner Roark, because, that's the talk, that's what everyone thinks. Now, there is a question from me and many other people asking, if it's an elimination situation, do they go to Strasburg? Now, if they go to Strasburg in Game 4 and they win, who gets Game 5? Gio Gonzalez?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if it was switched around and Scherzer had started 1, I would fully expect Scherzer to start Game 4. I would fully expect that. But Strasburg has been very disciplined since those, early in his career injuries about not pitching, over pitching, not pitching too many innings. And didn't he not play in the playoffs one year because he had reached his pitch limit?
Right, they shut him down, and I want to say that was 14.
Yeah, it was not that long ago. So I don't know if they would pitch him there. I know that would be a total Dusty Baker move, but I think Strasburg and his people, I don't know if they would go for that, pitching him, in with short rest like that. I'm not so sure. Scherzer, I think, would do it because he's got the big contract, and he's got the big contract. B, he's more of a veteran guy that you don't you don't expect those kind of arm injuries. There's earlier in your career, and he's just that's the kind of guy he is. Strasburg, I just don't know if that's something they would do or he would do. So it's going to be interesting to see.
Scherzer, like you said, has more veteran experience, and Strasburg, he's been around for a bit, but in this postseason situation, Scherzer's been around the map much more, both with the Tigers and the Nationals, so it would make more sense if that was the situation, but again, with Scherzer's injury, you're probably not going to see him pitch again in this division series, whether it goes 4 or 5, and that whole thing, to me, says that if it is indeed Tanner Roark in Game 4, I think it's almost essential that the Cubs take advantage of that and close it out in Game 4. I don't want to go back to Washington for a Game 5 to face Strasburg again.
No, I don't either. It reminds me of last year when we were really worried about having to face what's his face from the Giants.
Well, yeah, if we would have lost Game 4 of last year, we would have had to face the duo of Cueto and Bumgarner.
Yeah, and that was not something anybody wanted to do. And
no.
So it was imperative to win. I think this is a little less dire than that, but it's you just want to wrap this up. And the Cubs just were not hitting well until finally Dusty Baker did the Cubs a favor by pulling Max Scherzer.
Right. Exactly, because he pulled Scherzer right after the Zobrist double. And then on came, I think it was Solis, who was A, struggling, and B, facing a pinch hitter in Albert Almora who kills lefties. And it's almost like the Cubs pounced on that right away. They were getting no hit into the 7th inning, and then suddenly like that, boom, boom, the game was tied. That's how quickly this Cubs team took advantage of that. And you could see when they showed it on TV just how pissed and frustrated both Dusty and Scherzer were.
Yeah, you could absolutely see how frustrated Dusty was in the dugout, slamming his hands and throwing his arms in the air. But that's life. I mean, he and Joe both they're both clearly nervous about this series, and they're making some judgment calls that I don't think they would do in a regular season.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of controversy this morning over Zobrist playing over Baez, and I think a lot of people tried to explain it as Zobrist has more playoff experience, even though Javi has enough now considering they won a World Series, but has done better against Scherzer in his career. Obviously, we know Zobrist hasn't been playing well, and Baez does a lot of things better right now because he's younger and more athletic. And Zobrist was getting a lot of heat early on for grounding out to ending out a threat and the error he made to extend an inning. And obviously, I'll get to the errors in a minute, but there was a lot of controversy over that move in the lineup, and you're seeing that both heavily with both Dusty and Madden. And obviously there's playoff controversy in every series, but boy, it just seems constant in this national series.
Yeah, and a couple last things I just want to touch on with this Game 3 is the hit that drove in the ultimately game-winning run was Anthony Rizzo getting the bloop single and then screaming, "Respect me!" And I thought that was just great. The energy he brought and just the confidence that he had up at the plate, even though he hasn't done a ton in the series, was fantastic. And I think also is you saw the Cubs, the spark that they got to come back were all from some fantastic fielding plays after the abysmal play by Kyle Schwarber in left.
It's so funny because this team made some fantastic plays in the field. I can name 3 right off the bat. The Ben Zobrist one in the 8th inning of Zimmerman, number 1. Number 2, Hayward made a nice catch at the wall early on in the game. Number 3, John Jay's running grab in right center field, how he ran that down. And then you had 4 errors to contrast that in the same game.
Well, yeah,
So
it
it
also
was-
had the really nice play by Addison Russell.
Yes, I forgot about that. Right. Yeah, up the middle, diving smash. I forgot about that. So you had 4 great plays contrasted with 4 abysmal plays. The Zobrist error, the pickoff, the Schwarber one that was exceptionally bad that led to a run.
That was 2 errors. They gave him 2 errors.
That was the 2, yeah.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
was
because he dropped it and then he mishandled it.
he kicked it. That was so bad. And it's funny because all season long, you've had some pretty cynical sportscasters in Chicago that have talked about how bad Kyle Schwarber's defense is and how it's going to cost the Cubs. And we really haven't seen it. I mean, I know he doesn't have the range, and I know advanced metrics will show that he's not a good fielder, but he's been adequate enough, and there's been not a ton of noticeable things that have stuck out. But today was reminiscent of the Mets series from a couple years ago.
And it was so ironic considering that ball was off Daniel Murphy.
Yeah, and because I was like, all right, he's got this. He's going to end the inning. And I don't remember if it was in it, but I was like, where they're going to get Murphy. This is going to be fantastic because that guy is an SOB to get out. And then the ball, I just saw the wind start taking the ball and him running harder at the end. And I was like, oh, man. And then it hit off his glove. And then he kicked it into center field. And I was just like, I can't deal with this right now. And I really thought that would be the thing that sunk the Cubs, and it didn't. They just rose up from that.
Yeah, they did. I mean, they don't let this kind of thing get to them. I mean, you saw the post game after game 2. Rizzo's like, we're not going to let this get to us. We're not going to let us get down from this. We're not going to sink low. We're going to build off this, and we're going to come right back. And that's what the Cubs did. And this is what makes this Cubs team stand out from all the other Cubs teams before 2015. Whether it was 03, 84, all those teams. This is why they stand out for things like this. Nobody pointed fingers at Kyle Schwarber in that dugout. Said, oh, screw you. Look at what you did. Look at that. They said, we're going to pick you right up. We're going to pick you right up, and that's what they did. And I think that overall in this game, the Cubs stole this one from the Nationals.
Yeah, they did. I mean, Jose Quintana pitched as well as you could have expected him and was absolutely amazing. But the Cubs had no business winning this game.
No, I mean, with all the mistakes they made, with all the fundamental things they lacked, despite some nice plays, yeah, I mean, that's got to be really tough if you're a Nationals fan or you are the Nationals, especially considering the probability of a little bloop like that dropping in perfectly between 3 guys. It was like he hit it into the Bermuda Triangle.
Yeah, especially how fast some of those players are for the Nationals and how well they've fielded for the most part this year.
Well, you saw Turner, their center fielder, run down that Addison Russell drive the inning before.
That was phenomenal. I didn't think there was any way that anybody was catching that.
Yeah, off the bat, I jumped up and got ready to scream, and then he caught it. So, I mean, that's what really made it weird. And I almost feel like if one of those guys would have went out and dove for it, they may have had a chance. But I don't know. It seemed like they started to pull up a tad earlier. Maybe I have to watch it again and really analyze it. But to me, it almost looked like they were conceding it to drop in at the very last second.
I mean, honestly, is everybody slowing up and pulling up and letting it drop is a whole lot less embarrassing than all three of you running and diving and colliding, because I don't think there was anybody that was calling for that one.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not saying they lacked effort or anything. It was a very weird placement, and the way the situation kind of came out, it was just a really screwy situation for the Nationals. It just, to me, maybe I have to watch it again, but off the bat, I thought that Turner was going to come in and slide in and get it, and then seeing him pull up and it dropping, it just kind of surprised me. That's what I should say. It surprised me.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me it was that was a hit that won the game, but the Addison Russell one that I fully expected to be the one that they took the lead on just got caught and run down. That was the big shock for me.
Right. Off the bat, I thought Russell had a double into the gap. That didn't happen. Off the bat of Rizzo, I thought it was going to be a pop out on what was probably a sliding catch, because I know how fast Turner is there in center field, and it didn't happen. So I should just say it kind of caught me by surprise, and I got to watch it again to really look at it. I'm just kind of telling you my thoughts initially. I've watched other plays over and over from this game, but the bloop, the way the fielders came in, is something I have to watch again.
Absolutely. So moving on, we have Game 4 tomorrow, or today when you're listening. And you're going to see Jake Arrieta go, hopefully at 100%, and not sure who's going to be pitching for the Nationals. But I mean, this has absolutely all of the pressure on the Nationals, because the Cubs are at home. The Cubs are, most people didn't pick them to win this. They've got the advantage. They got to win one of two, and the Nationals just haven't been able to get out of the first round.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of pressure on them,
and you've got the Dusty choke factor.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of narrative to be kind of exploited here. Not just one narrative, multiple narratives. There's the Dusty factor. There's the Nationals history factor. There's the matchup factor. There's the favorite factor, whether they were favored or not in the series. There's a lot to talk about here, and you're right, there is a lot of pressure on the Nationals. With that being said, I do think that it is very important for the Cubs to win this Game 4, like I said earlier, because, having to go back to Washington is going to be tough. Now, I'm not saying the Cubs couldn't win a Game 5 if they forced it, but I just think it's really important for the Cubs to close this one out. I think the matchup is in their favor. We see Tanner Roark a number of times, so it's not like they're unfamiliar with him. You're not facing Steven Strasburg or Gio Gonzalez or Max Scherzer, but you got to know that in this game, I think it's going to be much more important for them to score early, step on their throats right away. Don't give them any kind of form of life, because we've seen the Nationals are a very good team, and they have the ability to come back. I think that this Game 4, even though the pattern's been kind of different, this is one where they have to get the ball rolling right away. They got to get the bats swinging and scoring early.
Yeah, absolutely, because Tanner Roark has the stuff to be good. He's a 13-game winner, but he also has a 1.33 WHIP and a 4.67 ERA this season. And regardless of how well the Nationals have band-aided up their bullpen, is they still have Fat Albers out there as one of their more dominant middle relievers. So you've got to pounce on this guy, get him out of the game, and then just eat up that bullpen and get that lead, because even if Arrieta is pitching well, you probably don't expect him to go more than 6 innings.
Yeah, exactly.
That means you've got 2 6 outs to bridge to Wade Davis to close this out.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be the Cubs are going to treat this like if they have a lead late, they're going to do all hands on deck here. They're going to say, "Hey, if we need you, we need you." And Davis, if we need to stretch you, we need to stretch you. They're going to do everything they can to win that game 4 and not have to go to a game 5. They're going to treat it as such. And if the Cubs get the ball rolling early on, that just puts more pressure on the Nationals. And if the Nationals get ahead early on, obviously if they scored in the first few innings, there'd be a lot of game left. But you have to feel like Joe Maddon's leash might not be very long on Arrieta. I mean, we saw in Game 4 of the 15 NLDS, Hamill pitched what? 2 innings? 3 innings to start when he fell behind and then they took the lead. So, there's a lot of different scenarios that could happen tomorrow or today, which you're probably listening to. Technically today because it's past midnight.
Yeah, and it's something that I want the Nationals hitters to be pressing for the whole game because they've got to do something. And we all know that pressing hitters tend to pop up, strike out, and ground out. They don't usually hit home runs and follow triple with double. They don't do those things when they're pressing. And if you get this team in an elimination game late in the game and they're behind, you know they're going to start pressing.
And that's the thing for me also saying, like I said earlier, that you hope to get them in that situation, but by doing that, you got to take a lead. You got to take it fairly early because if you take a lead fairly early and you take it multiple runs, then you're really going to add more and more pressure where if it's a close game, you won't see the pressing, I don't think, as quickly. But if you establish that early on and establish the pressure right off the bat, then you may see that happen early on in the game.
And Arrieta is a much better pitcher when he's got a lead.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Arrieta, I think tomorrow, I keep saying tomorrow. It's technically today. My real hope for him is just have good command. Because if you don't have good command, you're screwed. Against this Nationals team, you're screwed. You got to have good command. And what I'm kind of hoping is seeing the efficient Arrieta that gets a lot of ground balls and pop-ups. Like you said, if they're pressing, the chances of that are a bit higher. But that's kind of what I want to see. I want to see an efficient Arrieta that gets quick outs, not necessarily the strikeout stuff if you can avoid it while still getting outs. But, we'll see how he does with this leg issue.
So let's move on quickly to talk about the Bears. All right, I don't want to linger too much on the Bears because I was hoping that we would have a much more positive thing to talk about. But the Bears played the Minnesota Vikings tonight, and it was the first start of Mitchell Trubisky in his Bears era. And right off the bat, we had bad news during the week. Is Willie Young tore his tricep and is out for the season, leaving us really shorthanded with our outside edge rushers.
It's incredible how this team gets so much of its roster on IR year after year. I mean, there's got to be a reason for this. Like, I feel like if you have this much bad luck for this long, it's not just luck. There's something wrong here.
Yeah, I mean, at some point in this game, they lost John Timu. So you have,
yeah.
So now you're down to, and we'll discuss this a little more, but Jarrell Freeman gone for the season. Nick Kwiatkowski probably gone for the season. Danny Trevathan suspended. John Timu, that looked like a knee. So I haven't seen any final results, but that's not going to be so good. You're left with practice squad guys having the headset and trying to be the captains of this defense. At some point, this has to be on your strength and conditioning coach saying, how are we getting this many injuries? How? It's not like last year we're like, okay, this is fluky. You shouldn't have this many injuries. But then when you follow it up with another year and another year of these kind of, the year before was bad, last year was bad, this year is bad. How do you have this many injuries and think you can compete in the NFL?
You can't. I mean, if you lose any depth you have and playmakers you have, I mean, you're not going to do it. And they played a banged-up Vikings team with Sad Bradford hurt. They eventually took him out. Cooks is out for the year. I mean, they're really shorthanded. And, the Bears, they played some really good defense at times during this game, but you could tell that there were times when they were A, out of sync, and B, they were on the field so much they were getting tired.
Let's see, blah, 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 blah. So John Timu started the game as the signal caller. And here's the thing about John Timu is I really liked him coming out of the University of Washington. But the big knock on him is he's not fast. Like, he understands the defense. He's a hard-nosed guy. He can fill the gaps. He can do a lot of things, but he is not fast enough to be playing on third downs or be the anchor on a good defense. That's just not who he is. But for an undrafted guy and for filling in, being practice squad elevated, he has done admirably, and I fully expected him to be able to do decently the play calling as for the defense, and he did up until he got hurt. And then you just saw the wagon wheels came off because the Bears looked like a bunch of chickens with no heads running around.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is going to be a problem, and we've seen it be a problem the last few years. When you have a bunch of practice squad guys trying to fill in, there's no chemistry to establish. They're oftentimes undersized compared to other teams. So, it's unfortunate that we have to sit through this again, but that's the sad reality of it.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people talk, the Patriots, they go through the injuries, and the Packers, they're with a depleted offensive line, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? They still have Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady to lead them. So the Bears don't have that guy. They don't have that player that can transcend and do these things. They're playing with two bad tackles, no wide receivers, an injured starting running back, a rookie quarterback who only played 13 games in college, and you're on your your fourth signal caller on defense in 4 games or 5 games.
Right.
It's
how can you find any consistency or chemistry when that's happening?
Yeah, it just you can't do it. And the Bears, for the most part, until that point, had been playing really tough. And I know a lot of the sacks were because Sam Bradford just didn't look right out there, didn't have any mobility, and he went down pretty easy. And they had a lot harder time with Case Keenum. But to be fair, his Case Keenum, when he came in, was not in there very long before John Timu got injured, and the Bears defense just looked absolutely lost out there.
Yeah, and you saw that especially when they were using McKinnon on the run game. You saw them using the screen passes. I mean, they were eating the Bears' defense alive early in the second half with those screen passes and runs, just absolutely eating them alive.
Yeah, it was. They were going right at the center of the Bears' defense, right where or a Jarrell Freeman or Nick Kwiatkowski or a Danny Trevathan, any one of those guys would be filling the gaps and closing it up. There were just these gaping holes, and the Vikings were taking advantage, and then suddenly the defense is chasing. Then they get tired because it's always harder to spend more energy chasing than you do being the one chased, and the offense just started sputtering, and so it was tough. And especially considering the Bears shot themselves in the foot so many times. 6 penalties for 45 yards in the first half.
Can I just say one thing about the penalties? Are you ready for this?
Yes.
The Bears did a lot of stupid things, but my goodness, I thought that reffing tonight was an absolute disgrace.
Oh, it was so bad. That was the worst officiating I've seen since the replacement refs.
That was an absolute utter joke. That was disgusting.
That last penalty on
that
Leonard
was
Floyd, where
a
they got him from
joke.
hold. It was both guys were just tugging at each other, and I don't know how one way was holding and the other way wasn't. It was just pathetic. I think those guys just really wanted to hear the sounds of their own voices.
That was disgraceful. I was really pissed about that offensive pass interference early on that great throw by Trubisky. That pissed me off too. I didn't see anything there.
I mean, if you're going to be ticky-tacky, I could see it because he pushed the guy's head away, but it was nowhere near as bad as the one that Michael Floyd had later in the game that they didn't call that was right in front of the ref. So it was just, it's like in baseball when you can look past poor umpiring if it's being consistent on both sides poorly because you sort of work around it. But this one was poor and it wasn't evenly applied. And not saying one team just got the advantage over the other because there were some really bad calls against the Vikings as well. But it was just so uneven how it got applied that you just threw your hands up. It was frustrating. It's not, if they're calling a tight game with cornerbacks, you sort of let up and don't be as physical because it's going to happen. But if suddenly on this drive they're ticky-tacky and then another drive they're letting you manhandle a guy and then you go out there again trying to manhandle them and then they throwing flags again, it's really confusing and you lose consistency in the game. And this officiating crew was bad.
It was a joke. I'm almost not surprised anymore. I mean, that was just, we've seen so much bad reffing lately, and that was awful. But what can you do?
Yeah, it is one thing is you expect in a fast-paced game that, especially when you're in the field of play without pads, potential to get crushed, is to miss a fast bang-bang play. But to just consistently the whole game blow calls and call things that shouldn't have been called, that's just pathetic. And the league needs to start addressing these things because it's hurting the product.
It is, and people wonder why they keep going away and away from it, and that's one of the many reasons. Everything gets called. You can't breathe on a guy without a flag, and it takes control of the game, and nobody wants to see that.
Especially at the end of the game, is, no other than Vikings fans that are trying to win this game, that want their team to win this game, nobody else watching this game wants to see a ticky-tack call and where the announcers are saying, I don't see it. And then you having that have an impact on the outcome of the game.
Right. And all I'm going to say is that the reffing, look, I don't want to make excuses. The Bears did a lot of things wrong to blow this game, but I think 2 huge calls really could have swung things here. And it was 2 of the ones we talked about. I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah,
but you know what? That made a big difference.
Yeah, I'm not going to chalk this up to the refs, but it was some bad calls. What I'll chalk this game up to is 2 things. 3 things. Lack of depth at wide receiver.
That's an understatement.
The offensive line stunk, and this team was not ready to play. that's coaching.
Yeah.
Those are the three. I mean, and you could point to exact things like that fourth down play early in the game when they couldn't even figure out how to get a call in, had to take a timeout.
That was a
and then,
joke.
yeah, I mean, they couldn't get a play in, had to call a timeout, couldn't get a play in again, and got a delay of game penalty, and had to punt it anyway. It was just so mind numbing, and it's the epitome of what people have been hating about John Fox since he was in Carolina, is that he is so indecisive, and he's when it comes down to it, is he's not a good in-game head coach. The offensive line, that strip sack of Mitchell Trubisky, I mean, that guy didn't even have 2 seconds to make the throw. Is Charles Leno, who just got a boatload of cash to be the Bears left tackle, got blown by, and Mitch Trubisky just had nothing. And these wide receivers, I think the hope was that having Mitch Trubisky throw better balls would make them better receivers, like we see with Tom Brady. He makes bad receivers much better. But part of it is that there was no time to throw the ball, because every time Trubisky dropped back to pass, he was running for his life and throwing everything on the run, and the Bears receivers still weren't getting open.
The Bears receivers weren't getting open. The tackles were getting owned. It really wasn't a good recipe for Trubisky, who I thought did some pretty darn good things in this game. We saw his athleticism. We saw his ability to roll out and throw. We saw the accuracy he has. We saw kind of the awareness that he can have. But when you have all that happening around you, it's almost impossible to win.
Yeah, I mean, next week against the Ravens is going to be a much better environment, I think, for Mitch Trubisky, because the Ravens they're not an awful team, but they're not a good team either. Whereas they faced a really good Vikings defense today, and just that offensive line couldn't give any time.
Yeah, like I said, the tackles really got owned tonight.
And thank God Mike Glennon didn't play in this game, because could you imagine all that pressure with him? This would have been an absolute blowout game because of how many turnovers he would have had.
Yeah, exactly. I don't even want to think about that. But, you already saw many people, probably including yourself, you were probably thinking it because it is true. There were many times where you said, wow, Mike Glennon couldn't make that happen, and Trubisky did make that happen. Well, let's face it, how awesome was that 2-point conversion? Could you see that working under Mike Glennon? Because I don't think so.
No, not at all. I saw so many good things, but I saw also a lot of things that got cleaned up. And part of it is Dowell Loggins' play calling. Early in that game, they didn't give Mitch Trubisky, put him in a position to succeed. Partly with penalties, partly with bad play calling that didn't get them positive yards on first and second down. He had Mitch Trubisky in third and longs for several drives, and that's not good. But also, you need to give the guy. Typically, what you do with a young quarterback when you put him in there is you get him a bunch of easy completions, tight end screens, things like that to get him in the flow of things, and they just didn't do that. I don't know if it was the defensive fronts they were facing. I'd have to go back and watch more closely, but they never really put him in the position to get in the groove of the game.
Right. That's kind of how I felt too. I thought there were a lot of times where I scratched my head and got really frustrated with the way things were going down, and it didn't stop. It was like that way from beginning to end in the game.
And I The only point in the game when I got down on Mitch Trubisky is that interception, because, I mean, partly that was on Zach Miller. Is when a ball gets thrown like that, you've got to step into the ball and use your body to shield the defender instead of giving him, being passive. That's been the Bears' MO for a long time, is passive receivers instead of being aggressive and attacking the ball. But Trubisky shouldn't have thrown that one, because he was just being baited into throwing that.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where you groan and you're like, of course, that's so Bears, but you just got to accept the fact there's growing pains with this process, and like you said, there's kind of blame on each side, but that's what's going to happen when you have a rookie quarterback against a really good defense, and you got to give that defender credit. He made a good play as well to stay with that ball. So, none of my real anger of this game goes out towards Mitch Trubisky. It's pretty much everything around him, because, it's like, what can you do with that team and coaching around you when it's doing that?
And partly is I really don't think John Fox and this coaching staff is going to be here next year.
I hope not.
Unless they can just absolutely put together a killer game plan in. Because what you're seeing in Houston is the first game that what's his face from the Deshaun Watson played, is you didn't see too much difference. What you saw from Trubisky is not a lot of yards, played it safe, a lot of handoffs, made some nice throws here and there, showed some promise, and then every week has gotten a little better and a little better. There's been definitely some rookie mistakes and such, but he's proving that he's an NFL quarterback. But a lot of that is on the fact that Bill O'Brien is a good head coach and puts together these game plans. It's if the Bears can't put together a good game plan to make their young quarterback successful, then why are you having them around? Because you just said we're going to build our future around this guy. So if our coaching staff can't make him successful, then we better bring in a coaching staff that can. Cough. Maybe the offensive coordinator of Kansas City. Cough.
The telecast today called the Bears' offensive scheme boring and predictable. When the TV... they're right, yeah.
There's no other way to say it. Is when they go into... they're not nearly as predictable as they were under, like, John Shoop or anything like that. But when they go into certain formations, you sort of know what they're going to do. They run... When they have runs, they're very predictable runs. The only thing that makes them successful is you get some good holes open sometimes, and you've got two very good running backs. But you're getting Jordan Howard killed out there, and that's why you saw so much Benny Cunningham today. And you're gonna get Tariq Cohen killed. So it's if you're the Bears, you just got to figure out what it is you want to do, and get that game plan implemented pretty quick, because NFL stands for not for long. If this is the kind of scheme you put together week in and week out.
Exactly, right. And it's funny, there was so much frustration over that, and then there were two really, really awesome plays, the fake punt for the touchdown and then the 2-point conversion. It's like that stuff was great. So you saw two little flashes of creativity, and then a lot of just everything else was so boring and predictable, and the results kept showing. And there were times when I just stood there and said, are we coaching for Mike Glennon, or are we coaching for a kid that shows he could throw downfield?
Yeah, you've got to, it's not about throwing downfield, it's not about doing this, that, or the other. For the Bears to show that they're growing for the future, is they need to establish that comfort zone for their quarterback, where he's comfortable because he's not getting hit, and he's comfortable because he's making plays. You don't shrink the playbook for him per se. You implement the whole playbook, but you find the things that he does the best and utilize those types of plays the most.
Right. Now, obviously, as time goes on in the season and you see more Mitch Trubisky, we're hopefully going to see a bit more adjusting to the kind of things he can do. That's my hope.
Yeah, that's. I mean, you got to learn from this game, and hopefully, the game plan against the Ravens is much better because the Ravens are a very vulnerable team. They're a team you can beat, and
is that at Soldier Field or is that in Baltimore?
I think it's in Baltimore because I could have sworn, if I remember correctly, that the Bears played alternating games for the first half of the season. But let me double check.
Right.
It is in Baltimore.
Okay.
So, but one thing I do have to commend these coaches on is that fake punt was pretty nice.
That was awesome. That was really, really awesome. And we don't see that ever from a John Fox team. You see no creativity. You see very conservative calling. Seeing them actually do something somewhat ballsy was fun to watch for a change.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, Pat O'Donnell looked so comfortable just tossing that ball like he was playing catch in the backyard of his house.
Yeah, I know. It was a great throw.
And the Bears just absolutely sold it well. So, kudos to them. But it just sucks that they had to have such trickery to be able to, score some points.
It's like my philosophy is in this situation. You're a team that's not going anywhere. You have a young asset in a quarterback. You're really not playing for any playoff or crucial games. Why not be more creative? Why not? What do you got to lose?
Yeah, I mean, that's what you got to do is you've got to put together this game plan for your young quarterback. You've got to expand. Think outside the box. Is you don't have any receivers. I think Deontay Thompson is he's a nice complementary piece, but he's not like a number one receiver. Trey McBride looked okay, but he again is not a number one receiver. Marcus Wheaton has more decapitations than he does catches, and it's showing that you just don't have anybody that, and there's nobody out there you can get. There's just nobody. There's nobody on the streets. That's why I would, if I'm the Bears, I promote Tanner Gentry to the active roster because at least you saw the rapport that he had with Mitchell Trubisky during the preseason. And, but if I'm the Bears, I'm going to start utilizing multi-tight end sets. Adam Shaheen has been like MIA. Just completely MIA. I would start putting in 3 tight end. You've got so many tight ends on your roster. Start utilizing them. Put Zach Miller as in the receiver, his receiver position, and then run Shaheen and Sims as tight ends. Run a 2 wide receiver, 3 tight end set. You've got to be creative. You've got to start doing things outside the box. You'll have to start doing Tariq Cohen as a receiver. You're going to have to throw more to any of the playmakers that are the wide receivers that are making catches. It's you got to build on this. You can't just keep doing what you're doing because what guys you have running these routes are not getting open.
Yep, and, like you said, having more tight ends, at least if you get Adam Shaheen in there and you got to start developing him too. I think this is the perfect time to do it. You have your quarterback for the future. If you're going to have another young asset in Shaheen, you got to start doing that now. I mean, we haven't seen him at all, basically. You know what you got in Zach Miller, so you use him as a veteran guy, but you got to get Adam Shaheen in there more and more and more. And especially since this is a situation where your tight ends and running backs are all better targets to throw to than your wide receivers.
Yeah, I mean, Kendall Wright is the only wide receiver that's consistently catching the ball and has been decently open. But instead of just having him and then a bunch of scrubs running around, is put mismatches out there. Put a Tariq Cohen out there. Put a Zach Miller out there. Make them have to change their personnel. If nothing else, is having to change their personnel. If you throw a 3 wide receiver set and 2 of the wide receivers are Zach Miller and Tariq Cohen, that's going to change who they put out there. They're probably going to have to bring in a safety to cover Zach Miller because most cornerbacks aren't going to be big enough and strong enough to run with him. Tariq Cohen, they're going to have to take a cornerback to cover him because of how fast he is. And that's gonna create a mismatch, and that's gonna create a deep base defense that they don't normally run. And anytime you can get a defense out of their comfort zone, it's points offense. So you got to start being creative. And Dow Loggins is, we thought after week 1 that maybe he was up for this challenge, but he just hasn't risen to the challenge since. And part of that is we started blaming because how bad Mike Glennon is. But at what point do we start saying Dow Loggins isn't good enough for this job, and we've got to do better?
Yep, and it's especially now. The thing that I keep asking is, what do you have to lose at this point? You're developing someone who's going to be the face of your franchise, hopefully. You're not risking any playoff implications, clearly. What do you got to lose? There's no reason not to. You darn well know that other teams are not afraid of the Bears. They're not going in thinking that there's going to be some almighty trickery, even with a young quarterback who has a very bright future, but knowing the core that they have around him, why would you be afraid? If they actually had talented receivers that could do trick things, if they had more depth on a line, then sure, you'd be a bit more afraid of them. But in the state they're at right now, whether it's Trubisky or Glennon, teams are not going in there with this all-thought mystery of what the Bears can do. They know what they can do, and if you keep running the same things, it's not going to get you anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. So going forward, I just don't know what we're going to expect. Is this Ravens team is one that's just an enigma too. Is they beat a bad Browns team, they beat a bad Bengals team, they got blown out by Jacksonville, they got blown out by a bad Pittsburgh Steelers team. So who knows what we're going to be facing? But Joe Flacco is not 100%. So they have no backup. I mean, Case Keenum is probably one of the better backups in the league. They have no backup in Baltimore. I mean, they were the team that people were thinking was going to sign Colin Kaepernick, but
yeah, I thought it was going to happen.
Yeah, I did too. So they really don't have anybody. So if they were to get to the Ravens quarterback, they are doomed because they might have to play a running back and play the Wildcat the rest of the game.
Yeah, exactly. So, you're facing an opponent that's not as high powered as the past 5. So take more chances. Do it. Why not?
Yeah. But I don't really want to talk anymore about the Bears because that game was, although I saw some nice things from Mitch Trubisky and I am more excited for the future and seeing him grow, that the Bears have so much work to do to be a contender that I'm just annoyed.
Me too. I'm annoyed, and frankly, there was a lot of trash football in that game, both the reffing and the play. It just wasn't a pretty sight for a lot of it.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's late, and I think we all want to get to bed. But so let's call this a night, and thank everyone for listening. Please hit us up on social media at ShyFanPat1, at Swirsky Sports, SwirskySports.com, Facebook.com/Swirsky Sports. Make sure you guys hit subscribe however you listen to podcasts, whether it's iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube. Share with your friends. And again, thank you guys so much for listening. And until next time, bear down.
Cubs win! What a lucky break! The good Lord wants the Cubs to win!
We thank Ditka and God for all they have provided.
Cubs win! Cubs win! Cubs win!
Oh, I don't want her. You can have her. She's a Packer fan. She can't fit in my van.
And she looks like Remember, New Yorkers, smoking crack is not legal on the plains.
Bears 31 to -7.
The Bears.
Oh, when the Bears go bearing down.